really excited to have this conversation because we first started talking to each other, and then we started talking to women who are a really eager audience and head nods very quickly. And then we realized if we really wanted to make progress, we really needed to talk to men and not call men out, but call men into the conversation. So that's the setup for our conversation here today, which will be hopefully very fun and informative. So I'll kick us off, Rob, and welcome. Thank you for being with us. One of our first questions is around the barriers to progress and what could create more progress. What do you see from your experience?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This is great, and I really appreciate being called in and invited in. Barriers, I think it starts with awareness. I think people have to understand, hey, this is still an issue. One of the things that struck me in your book was the word still. You start to read your book and you sit there and you go, wait, still? We're still having this conversation? And what I loved about your book was, yes, Rob, we are still having this conversation, so pay attention.
We don't want to call men out, we want to call men in. So we're really grateful that you were willing to be called in and talk with us about this important topic.
Thank you. I think, as I said to C and Mitzi, when Angelique knocks and invites me in, I will always go. So a pleasure to be here, and congratulations on the book. It's brilliant. I think I said to you when you called me up and said, I've written a book, I was, Angelique, when did you have time to do that? It's amazing. So congratulations, first of all. It's a really interesting question to start with the barriers, right? What's stopping us? Why are we here? And I think when we talk about Adam and Eve, and when I think about it, I think there's kind of two groups of barriers. Angelique, I like to put stuff in buckets. But there's organizational barriers, and then there's individual barriers. And I think we have to think about both of those things to be successful in breaking either down. I don't think you can just talk about organizational barriers, workplace culture, D&I initiatives, which are all good and well, without thinking, how does that impact the individual? One of the things that we think about Adam and Eve is, organizationally, we say we're for Adam and everyone. And that's more than just a pun, I promise. It's thinking about, as an organization, how do we create a culture, a process, principles, values within our agency that everyone can buy into, everyone can understand, and everyone can feel ownership over. So I think there are those organizational things. How, at an organizational level, can we open up our agencies, our workplaces, so that everyone feels comfortable doing their work, but also calling things out when we need to, or calling people in when we need to. And so I think the second part is individuals. How do we help individuals understand inclusion, diversity, and what tools do we all need in order to break down some of those barriers? I think as a leader, as a white male leader, over the last 5 years, a lot has changed. I am now aware, in a way that I wasn't before, of how fortunate I've been to get to this position and the external forces that have brought me here. I reckon 5 or 10 years ago, I would have thought it's down to just my merit, right? And I know now it's not.
I was thinking about the barriers, and I think they're kind of obvious, but they can be rectified. And I don't know how deep into it you guys get in the book, but I think the first barrier really comes down to, if you're talking about the workplace, comes down to pay and compensation. And so that's sort of one thing that I started looking at as the leader of the company maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, really examining it. We signed on to the 3% pledge. We were one of the founding companies in that pledge. And it was really eye-opening when we now we do annual audits, make sure everything's completely equitable. But when we started and I took a look at it, it was pretty frightening.
And how did that happen? Do you think that it started? I mean, it's great that you're rectifying it, but why do you think? What was the cause of why it started out so unequal?
I think there's sort of inertia in companies, and it just sort of rolls, and not really thinking about it and being aware of it. And that was sort of the first step. And it started before we signed the pledge, but when we signed the pledge, they really keep you to a process that we follow. And now we're completely equitable. And it's a great question. I don't know why it is. I can't think of a reason. Was it bias? Was it not? But also our executive leadership team is now 50-50, and at the time it was like 80-20. And so that skews everything off when your executives are the most compensated in the workforce, and it's 80% male.
It's kind of funny. I don't think there are barriers. I think it's just the way that this industry has been built upon, and I feel that sometimes we haven't self-actualized yet. Because to me, when I think of what I do in particular on the creative side, to me, again, it goes to talent. There is no reason why women should be ill-equipped to do that. That's kind of stupid. So it's like, it's just, are you good? There should be no bias. I don't understand why it would be.
So there aren't talent barriers. The women can obviously do the work, and yet there aren't enough of women in chief creative officer roles. So what's in the way?
To be honest, it strikes me as odd. Judging the New York Festival, met a lot of women CCOs, amazingly talented. I was obviously not surprised, but I was in awe when I was listening to them talk. And it's like, there is no reason why they shouldn't be more. I feel that when you get to that level, the CCO level, there's a big part of management that goes beyond how creative you can be. I find sometimes women are better managers than men. They're more empathic. So I really don't get it. It's kind of an interesting question. I do not have the answers.
We talk about allies a lot, and having allies is critical for us to be able to accelerate the dismantling of gender bias. And one of the challenges with building allyship is potential allies being fearful of backlash or whatever. What are your thoughts on that in terms of fear as a thing? And then what we might do to dismantle the fear to be able to bring in more allies?
It's definitely a thing. I felt it, right? Fear of being called out for the wrong reason. And as I was reading through some of your book, I kept on catching myself going, have I done that? Does that make me a bad leader if I've been there, if I've done some of that? Even your title, have I said that? And I think that's why the book is so powerful, because it makes you think that at every step of the way. I think on the topic of fear, I think it's a shame it's had to get to the point where women are having to reach out to men and call them in. But it's great that we're now here. And even in the exchange we've had around coming together here, there's bits of fear there. But what I take is, unless we have these conversations, unless we read, unless we educate ourselves, nothing will change. And if there's anything I can do as a leader in this industry, is to open myself up, be a bit vulnerable, and think about how we can change. Otherwise, people that are on my teams will look at me and go, what have you done? And I think if we as leaders don't do things like this and open up the conversations, then things won't change.
You mentioned fear. We've talked about fear and how to overcome it. What do you see as the role of everybody in trying to eradicate or minimize the fear?
It's a very interesting question, because I talk a lot about fear in every aspect of the industry right now. in this one in particular, at least my thinking would be is that the world is changing very rapidly, and it has to change because there are a lot of things that need change. And sometimes I feel that we all need to understand that, yes, some people are trying to hold on to whatever past they loved, and that's not a good thing. And I obviously, that's kind of where you sometimes call them out instead of calling them in. But I think we also need to understand that the world is changing at such a rapid pace, and some of us are not that fast to keep up with the changes. And sometimes we need, I wouldn't say forgiving, but we need to be more empathetic to, for some people, it is a little bit hard, and they trying hard. And sometimes I feel that at point I felt that no matter how hard you try, you're never gonna win, right?
Right.
And that brings a lot of fear because I'd rather not say anything, I'd rather not interact because they're gonna get to me anyways. And I understand where all the fear comes from. And I think, like you said, the idea is to call them in. And the learning curve for some people is steeper, and it takes longer. And there's too many things, and there's too much new. And sometimes we need to be a little bit more understanding that we all don't grow at the same pace. And sometimes it's a matter of giving people a little bit more time.
The other thing that our industry can do in terms of allyship and role modeling is it's not just who we hire, it's not just in your organization, it's the work that you put out there. And are you doing inclusive work that you're putting out there? Are you working on casting with your clients? Are you making sure that there's representation in your work? Because it's just as important the work you put out into the world as what's happening inside the organization. You know, sometimes you're impacting, you know, your work's being seen by millions and millions of people. And so we have a real focus on that also as well. So that helps. But, you know, it has to be done in the right way. It can't just be done because it looks like, that was on the brief, you know, and so that's how we cast it. It has to really feel authentic.
So how do you deal with the guy who says, "Oh, I am so tired of just, like, I can't say anything. I'm not allowed to say anything anymore. I've just had it." How do you suggest bringing that guy in?
Vent and go. Vent it. Yes, we're all tired. We are all tired of walking on eggshells. And let's say it. Let's just come out and say it. And maybe that has to be almost co-created in the front of the meeting. Maybe there's a moment, I think especially for creative departments. You know, creative departments, you know, as I was a rising writer in the business, there was an understanding that this is an area where we're going to say a lot of off-the-wall stuff. You know, as David Ogilvy once said, and I'm paraphrasing here, you know, oftentimes a good idea comes from a joke. So in some ways, I think you have to set the ground rules that we're going to be in this room or in this Zoom, and this is an off-limit Zoom. You know, like whatever we say, we're going to say here, and let's try that, and let's all agree that we may say some stuff that's not quite right, because we're not trying to say stuff that's not quite right, but it happens. You know, we're in a new world now. So that's what I would offer up.
There's a lot in the context of the last couple of years that has created more attention internally and, you know, external factors, et cetera. And it feels like there's a related conversation happening about the return to the office.
Yeah.
And there was an article that was written recently that was, no one wants to go back to the office more than white men.
Yes.
And yet as a creative industry, it's easy to make the case for how work can be better when you're all together in the room. How do you think about that aspect of inclusion and different perspectives?
I think the return to office, I think the pandemic and working from home has been a massive inflection point for workplace culture, full stop. And then when you add in the layer of inclusion, it becomes even more interesting. I remember that article. I think you and I discussed it when it came out. It was like, I've been planning, thinking through our return to office and why it would be the right thing to go back in some form. And then I read this article and it really stopped me in my tracks. And I think we're all aware that the office space and modern workplace culture was shaped by men in suits. I think the pandemic gives us a chance to reset that to a degree. If there's anything good that's come out of the craziness of the last 24 months, maybe that is one of those things that it does give us a chance to go stop.
I want to build on that too, because I think that's a great idea. And when I think of myself as a woman of color, and I think about this hybrid environment, people talk about, it levels the playing field because everybody's in a square. I don't know that that's always the case, but I would say, to build on what you were saying, is talk to people, but make sure you're talking to a diverse group too, right? It's really, really important.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the other piece of this, which I think sounds, almost too obvious, is that you have to listen.
Yeah.
So ask the questions. Don't just show up and be like this interview where I'm just yakking the whole time. Ask some questions. Yeah. And I think when you hear people's stories and you hear what they're struggling with or what they're happy about, something happens. And you learn things, and that's how you form a connection. I think the most important thing you can do with somebody is just listen. And you'll see.
Yeah, we've seen some of the most, the companies making the most progress have some theory like that. Find new ways to listen, and I think that idea of creating the space as a leader feels like the most simple place to start. Obvious,
I like that phrase though, find new ways to listen.
Can you think of, is there a story or an example that you can think of where in previous times you might not have been aware and then you either kind of had an aha or I'm glad I didn't do that type thing?
I do recall that once around 2012, when this started to become an issue that we were becoming aware of, I recall thinking about finding a creative director for a particular job and being in a meeting saying, we should just look at female candidates. And that was a big moment because heretofore we didn't do it that way. And we had to understand this dynamic between, yes, we want to find the best person for the job, but we're going to look at a pool of candidates that are all going to be women. And this was, it was earth-shattering.
I'm sure that was really hard to say back in 2012. And if you were to say that today and there was pushback in the room, do you have any advice for people on how you would handle it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it comes back to awareness and conversations. I think that the best thing to do is talk to people about it, air it out. And I think when people resist, oftentimes it might be that they're not aware. There might be a sense of fear, fear of doing the wrong thing. But I think if you start to have the conversation, you can at least draw out, okay, what are the barriers here? What is the issue if we just look at female candidates? Tell me more.
We started, we were always on a uphill battle because the company was founded by 4 white guys. And that's how we started the company. And so 4 white guys, and we're all still there. That's how we started. So it was not diverse at all when we started. And so we had to then expand, create an executive leadership, spread out the the departments and leadership, and that's the way we had to put everyone on an equal footing. Is it's not the founders aren't running the place. It's this executive team that is that is a diverse executive team, and that took time. But we were sort of at a disadvantage from the beginning.
Yeah.
But that's interesting that you were sounds thoughtful and proactive about like recognizing that that's going to be a problem. We have to diversify the.
Well, we didn't recognize that for a while. That happened like, we've been around like 17 years. That probably happened like 10 years in. We were like, okay,
interesting.
Yeah.
And was it just like the environment around you that made you start going, hey, maybe we need to?
I think it was two things. I think it was three things. I think it was the environment around us. I think it was the work we were putting out there. It was not getting innovative or modern enough, which means we were not having enough diverse thought in there. And then also was cultural, what's happening in the world. And I think it was those three factors. Yeah.
Well, that makes the very clear business case to pay attention.
I think then the question becomes, how do you accelerate? What do you need? What tools? What events? What will help accelerate the change? Because I think about, great music.
Yeah.
My dad used to listen to 8-track tapes. Well, you can't listen to 8-track tapes anymore, right? So what happens? What can accelerate the change? Because like you said, the war for talent is intensifying. We've got the great resignation and we've got the quiet quitting. It's going to impact the business. So what?
It is
what
impacting the business.
Yeah, what helps? What will accelerate?
To me, that the ones that are in charge, we need to make a very conscious effort. And we need to educate ourselves, get educated, ask when we have doubts. Hopefully, we'll find good partners in women that would understand that we might not be there, but they will be able to teach us and point us out when we're wrong. But it's like, this is how you can fix it. So in the calling them out, I think it's okay to call us out because we need to change some behaviors, but explain to me and teach me, and hopefully I'll make a conscious effort to learn as fast as I can. So I think in that sense, it's on us to make the effort to make that steep learning curve as flat as possible. Just try to read a lot, ask a lot, have conversations, train and all that, because in the end it's impacting your business. If you're not changing fast enough, the one that's going to be losing is you, because you will lose all the talent. You'll get stuck with a room with zero diversity, and then you'll not be able to tell the stories that need to be told, and then you go into the inevitable decline.
You talked about hiring and some of that stuff is, salary, some of that stuff is obviously measurable, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff we talk about in the book are the small micro moments that really almost people don't even notice. Like, is it always, hey, Angelique, will you take the notes? And hey, who can set up the next Zoom meeting? Or some of these, so they're not, in fact, the reason why I think they continue to go on is a lot of people don't even notice, that they're happening.
That's why I love the title of the book.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. What do you?
I mean, I love it.
Yeah.
Angelique and I met, I don't know, a couple months ago, and she told me the title of the book, and I was like, yeah, it's so good, because it's an outdated phrase, but it seems innocuous, but there's like so much wrapped up into it. It's such a derogatory.
So these are things that aren't measurable. They're just the small, irritating things. So that's the stuff really hard to kind of it can be hard to get your hands around, because the fact that some people don't even notice it.
Yeah, it is death by 1,000 paper cuts, right?
Yeah,
it's like those little, I guess they're microaggressions, you would call those.
Yeah.
They happen, and words matter. I think that's something that, for me, I had to really focus on and learn as maybe more of a optimistic, fun-loving leader. I had to really focus, choose my words carefully, tamper a lot of maybe the way I was leading in a good way. But I think that's why I think the title resonates so well, because no one would ever say that to me.
Right.
They would. They'd
And
be
that's
like,
the thing, yeah.
Ever. Like,
Yeah.
I've never heard that.
Yeah.
No one said that to me,
Right.
because you're supposed to be the, focused male, serious business person. So, that's why I think you guys really nailed it. I don't know that I'd be able to answer it, but I have a question for you guys.
Okay.
How about that?
Great.
When will you guys feel like the issue has been solved?
I think it's solving is we have a long way to go. So, but I would think that at least how we know we've made progress is when there's just more discussions about it, which is obviously the whole purpose of our book and why we go out there speaking and trying to give language to these things, so people will be able to say like, "Oh, great idea, Greg," and people know okay what that means, so they can shortcut it to like, "Oh, the guy's talking over the woman," or whatever the case may be. So I think giving language and having conversation, because the one thing that's so interesting about all these, we talk about 31 different micro moments. The solutions are really easy. I mean, it's not like you're having to go and build the Empire State Building. This is like, it's very easy to stop doing them. So I think if people put their mind to it, I think we can make a lot of progress very quickly.
Yeah.
But it comes with awareness.
And I do think in terms of allyship, it's when there is no fear of saying or doing, right?
Right.
There's no shame. It's like, here's a situation. Let's get the minds around the table and let's
roll up our sleeves.
Yeah,
and
you're
do
not,
it.
I got to go talk about this, right?
Yeah.
That'll be progress.
I love that.
That'll be progress.
That's big progress. Well, it sounds like your second book, Calling Men In, is coming to a store near you.
Thank you for helping us.
Are you in? Are you in? Are you in?
Yeah, I'm in.
All right.
I'm in. Give me chapter 12.
All right.